Hello again. I'm Tim Tomlinson and co-founder of New York Writers Workshop. We have a new, how would you say, a new slogan. It's we tell the best stories, yours. So I think it kind of marries with yours, the Underland. This is such a wonderful merger. This is our third event here at Underland, and we just love this space. And we're starting to get the word around sufficiently to fill up some of the chairs. So just great to see everybody here. Great to know that there are so many people out there in the international audience. If you're watching online, please do say hello. Let us know where you're checking in from, and we'll see if we can get you a shout out. The only thing I want to mention in terms of admin and proceedings is that we have 4 readers, wonderful readers. I'll introduce them in a moment. Everybody brought books. They are for sale at a merch table right over in the corner. So once we finish the evening, we'll invite you to go do the right thing, and the authors will be happy to sign their books. We'll give each reader roughly 15 minutes, and when we conclude the reading portion of the session, we'll do some Q&A. We'll get everybody to sit up here and just run through a few questions. And we like to get the audience involved in that as much as possible, including the international audience. So those of you who are watching from anywhere, you can send an email to newyorkwritersworkshop@gmail.com. I'll take a look at the question or the comment and share it with the group. The only other thing I want to mention is that New York Writers Workshop will be engaging in another international conference in May in Mexico. And that's May 21 through June 2. We have 7 nights in Mexico City, followed by 5 nights in the Yucatan in the town of Valladolid. And we have a wonderful faculty, great lineup of sessions. Please check out the website and take a look at the details. We'd love to have you come down. It's our 3rd international conference. And each one seems to get better and better. We're really looking forward to dropping down south of the border. It's a little closer to home. So tonight we have an international crew checking in from all over the globe. Yuyu Sharma, all the way from the Himalayas in Nepal. Indran Armatanayagam from Sri Lanka via the Baltimore area. And then from somewhere in the friendly skies, we have a parachute in from Robin Hemley, who seems to spend more time in the air than anywhere else. Welcome to the Earth, Robin. And we have Sara Cahill-Marin from one of the most exotic places that we've ever brought into the gallery, Patchogue, New York. It's an island just about 8 miles away from where I, did something for many, many years of my youth. Okay, so I'll introduce each of the readers one by one, and I'll bring up Yuyu first, followed by Sara, then Robin, and we'll close with Indran. So everybody has the bios of the writers on their sheets, so you can consult those. They're almost like if these were scrolls in ancient Rome. I'd open them and they'd fall down to the floor and roll out to the back. The CVs are incredible. So I'm not going to read everything that's on the bios, but I will say that Yuyu Sharma is a world-renowned Himalayan poet and translator. He's published 10 poetry collections, including The Second Buddha Walk, A Blizzard in My Bones, New York Poems, Quaking Cantos, Nepal Earthquake Poems, Nepal Trilogy, Space Cake, Amsterdam, and Annapurna Poems. Most recently, Lost Horoscope, from which I believe you will read tonight. All of these, or many of them, are available in the back. Half the year, Yuyu travels and reads and conducts writing workshops all over the world, and this is one of the cases where you hear a phrase like that and it's not hyperbole. I think this itinerary began in Ireland, and it's going to Cleveland, it's been in California, just everywhere and anywhere. Back home, he goes trekking in the Himalayas, and New York Writers Workshop will join him there for a conference in 2024, 2025. We're very happy to have our dear friend Yuyu read here at the gallery. Please come up, Yuyu.
So, namaste, everybody. Namaste means I bow to you. I bow to the soul of God in you. So, this is the greeting we have in the Himalayas when we meet each other. Nepal, everything is sacred, everything is holy. So, I come from this land of great mountains, high mountains, land of extremes, extreme beauty, extreme natural splendor, extreme poverty, extreme suffering, as well as, extreme political ideologies. We had Maoists raging war and now in power all these years. I will begin my reading with a poem on the Himalayas about the porters who carried the load into the Himalayas. Nepal was closed for the rest of the world for several centuries, and then these tourists came, the hippies, and they changed the entire landscape. And this poem I want to read is called Mules. On the great Tibetan solitude, they meet me again, old forsaken friends. On their faces, fatigue of a drunken sleep. Their lives worn out, their legs shaking with flags of bleeding ascents. Age-long bells clinging to them like festering wounds, beating notes of a slavery that modernism brings. Cartons of iceberg, mineral water bottles, solar heaters, Chinese tiles, tin cans, carom boards, sacks of rice, and iodized salt from the plains of Nepal Tarai. Butterflies of the terrace fields know their names, singing brooks, tempests of their breathless climes. Traffic alert and time-tested, they climb, carrying dreams of posh peacocks, pamphlets of a secret religious war, filth of an ecologist-style seaman, entire kitchen for a cocktail party at the base camp, defunct development agendas of guilty donors, the West's weird visions lusting for an instant purge. Stone steps of the mountains embossed on their drugged brains like lines of reported love, scratched on the historic rocks of the water spouts. Starry skies of the dozing valleys know the ache of their secret sweat. Sunny days along the distant rivers taste of their bleeding eyes. And the greatest fiction of their struggling lives lost like real mules, clattering their hooves on the flagstones, encircling the cruel grandeur of bloodthirsty mule paths around the glaciers of Annapurna. So Annapurna again is a wife of Lord Shiva. Everything is kind of named after something sacred. And because Annapurna means literally someone who feeds you. So the glaciers, they melt and they cultivate the entire landscape. So no wonder that they named this mountain as Annapurna. Everest, actually, I always make it a point to say that Everest is not a Nepali name. The Nepali name of Everest is Sagarmatha, meaning forehead of the sky, which is very beautiful, very poetic. Everest is the name of this British guy who in the colonial times tried to prove if Everest is the highest mountain in the world. People had no idea. And they named the mountain after him. The Tibetan name for Everest is Chomolungma, meaning mother of the winds of the world. But British come and they change everything and they go and nobody knows our mountains. So this, and also in Sanskrit there's another word for Himalayas, and the word is Devatatma, meaning place where soul of the god lives. So as Tim was telling, I trek in the mountains when I'm not traveling, even like all over the flags and carrying my bag. Even now I have 2 bags in the stairs. I have to fly from here to New York, to Cleveland. So I want to tell the story. I always tell the story about this. Once I was trekking in the mountains in Annapurnas, and after 6 days, it was very difficult kind of to climb. So I met this German lady, and she said, "What do you do for a living?" I said, "I'm a poet." "Oh, Dichter," she said. You got to go to on top of this mountain." I said, "What do you mean? I know, I live here, I know this." She said, "I'm strong German motive." She said, "No, you have to go with me." She dragged me all the way to this remote kind of mountain in the dark. You know, in Himalayas, it gets dark very early. So I was taken to this remote mountain, and it's getting dark, and I see this lodge owner where I go. There's nothing, one lodge, one kind of small shack, kind of house. So, and this guy is a shaman kind of guy, and he's making local wine, and he has a huge dog. And I'm afraid of dogs because when I was small, I was bitten by a dog. So I get very paranoid when I see dogs, and they actually know my fear. So I said, please tie the dog. And this woman wants to leave me alone, and she wants to go back to our other village. So it turns out to be, I said, please tie the dog. I'm very afraid. He says, sir, come on. It will do nothing to you. Just have local wine and just go to sleep. I said, but I have to go to the toilet at night. And it's outside. It's all open. It's a wilderness. He says, sir, don't worry. I said, please tie the dog, please. He said, no, don't worry. He will do nothing to you because his mother and his grandmother was eaten by the tiger who comes at night. So I said, what? So I was like shaking all night long. I couldn't even go to the toilet. I said, there's a tiger here? And then his mother and his grandmother was eaten by them. I said, oh, God. And then I woke up in the morning and I saw all around me these beautiful glaciers. And then I knew why the German mother had brought me there. It was so, it's like I could see the spirit of the God, the soul of the Devatatma. So, and I looked at the lodge, the name of the lodge, it was Little Paradise Lodge. So I wrote this poem there. Little Paradise Lodge. Hope New York Writers Workshop will go to this Little Paradise Lodge. But we have to trek for 6 days.
Oh my God.
My pen frozen against the daggers of Annapurnas. And in a blank, shapeless plank chopped from his sandalwood tree trunk and used as a table, I place my elbows and hold my face in my hands. Blinding snows of the Annapurna ridge mutually shining in the eye of my mind, I sit in the spacious courtyard of your paradise lodge, deciphering shrill notes of birds in the mossy trees. One bird initiates a lilting note like our meeting, while others let loose a racket of breath vessels, ending with question tags. Can I stay longer? At least one more day in your little paradise lodge. Two birds playing in the crimson cherry tree stir a chord that seems like opening up of the blossoms of our bodies. Would you take me away and marry me? But what about this electric whistle? The cicada's constant chirp, chirp, chirp. The struggle of our breathless bodies against the dark suit of the night. The pigeons strutting freely in your courtyard go like exhausted porters climbing the mule pass in their singing gorges. Their guttural quint quint qua, quint quint qua, quint quint qua. They seem to be using a human language, a kind of hush speech robbers might use. Love, in the courtyard of your little paradise lodge, I see silence turning flowers into daggers. A herd of cows shuffles past me in a joyous mood, festive, like young girls going to a hillside fair saying, don't you go away, brother, don't you go away. We would be back until dusk with presents. A cuckoo passes overhead. Is this thing ka, ka, ka? Please, do not leave me alone. I'm utterly alone, stuck on the last mountain of the world. And beyond me, just one more mountain where they say a deity lives, guarding a tiny turquoise lake. And thereafter, nothing but realm of melting snows with souls of the gods. But, it's not just kind of poverty or suffering. And, there's a lot of romance. Like I was in Aspen, and they took me around. They will drive me in Colorado or in this other place, like in the Colorado mountains. They will just drive me everywhere. But in Himalayas, you have to walk. So which is far more beautiful, and also people there, the landscape and the people. In America or in Europe, I was in Alps, they show me all this, but it looks like a nice garden. There's nobody there. But in Himalayas, the monasteries, the people living there, struggling for their survival. You meet these the villages and the whole romance. So this poem I want to read is a love poem dedicated to all the young people here. And it's, in Sanskrit, we have this theory of rasas. Each poem must have its ras, means kind of juice. So each poem has a predominant emotion, or a performance has. So it could be love, it could be horror, it could be obscenity, it could be motherhood or chivalry. So this poem has love as its predominant emotion, and it's about someone else's wife, so it's more interesting. River. Between your marble shoulders and my hairy chest, the river roaring, tears, tears, tears. Between your mellowing mouth and my center tongue, a night of flame, then flesh, flesh, flesh. Between your hefty thighs and my throbbing hands, clouds drunk from the forests of rhododendrons, rhododendrons, rhododendrons. Between your almond eyes and my warm mouth, rain dropping like pearls on the plump leaves of the jungle, jungle, jungle. Between your shimmering skin and my dark hair, grass greener than the greenest parakeet, growing yellowish from incessant rain, rain, rain. Between your nights by the impotent pillow of your husband, and my crazed headpiece, a poem of spring that shall fill my deep wounds, sprouting flowers, flowers, flowers. Between your tulips and my fragrant pen, a brain fever bird's crazy cry, mad, mad, mad. Between the sparkle of your teeth and my sleep, a rain coming like a roar of a starving stream in the starless summer gloom of the night, night. Between your melon breasts and thrust of my soft lips, the rage of the river battering its head against the magic mountains, mountains. Between your decisions and my flickering lamps, the river man, you poet, you bastard, go away. Before I read this poem about New York City, because I love New York City, I'll tell you why later. I want to read from my new book, which is kind of a lost horoscope. It's about pandemic. When I was I got COVID in 2020. I was in Himalayas. I was stuck. You know, I had when I was small, I had this horoscope made by my grandfather, and it said he will die when he's 7. I never died, you know. And then when he's 6, it's the ladder of his life. He will again. There's a chance. So I was very petrified. So, but somehow I lost that horoscope. I never found it. My grandfather. And also it's about how, I mean, I was, when I was small, my father and my mother were very religious people. My father took me to one of these holy people, you know, these Nagas, sadhu, they have dreadlocks and they have ash over the body. They want to torture the bodies, thinking that body is evil, body desires, body lusts. So the jewel in the lotus, the whole idea is that you shouldn't give body what it wants. The paradox is in the lotus-like perishable, body, the soul lives, which is imperishable. So jewel in the lotus. So the whole idea is to kind of renounce the world and stay aloof. And my father actually one day took me to one of these holy shrines by the Blue River, Satluj, and he said, "Guru, I have 2 sons. This is one of them. He's the elder one. I want to donate him to you." Mm-hmm. And I was like 7-year-old boy looking around. I said, "What's happening?" My mother is outside. She can't even come in. She can't even enter their kind of cottage because these are celebrate sadhus. So I am thinking, would I ever go back? Would I live like them? And the guy smokes, they smoke hashish, they take the big long puff, and he said, "He's a good boy, send him to school." If he had said that, you have no idea what it would look like today, or where I would be. So I'll read this, probably a version of the poem. We don't have much time, so probably some excerpts from the opening. And it talks about how things changed in my life when I got COVID. And like all those old years. And then I became a kind of shaman in the village, because my father's, I will go to the shrine, and I will crawl around the shrine like it. But I was embarrassed. I thought, I'm going to English school, and what will my friends say? It's kind of funny business I'm doing here. So I sort of suppressed it. But now I realize that was a kind of gift from the gods, and I kind of, now when I read poetry, it comes back and rocks me. I think that was a kind of shamanic kind of initiation that started somehow. So this poem, Last Horoscope. Believe me, I'm risking my life here, coming out in the open to sit in the Cafe Mozart, to resume my routine of pouring sparks from my tamed sleep onto the pages of my moleskin notebook that had remained blank for more than a year. A familiar fright keeps hammering the clammy walls of my fast-shrinking brain, my jaws unhinged, twitching noisily as I crack open my mouth to suck in the still quarantined air. My body spooled, feeble as a dry twig, my side fractured from staring into the rings of stupor. I wake up to sit upright in my bed, bend my neck to stare at my feet on the floor. I part them and bring them back together. Nothing seems to get better. It refuses to go away. This phantom that all night long hovered over my bedpost, gliding in and out of the cavern of delirium that once surfaced in the labyrinth of my horoscope, piling up an irreparable pagoda of quivering ashes. The boy will climb 6 steps on the golden ladder, stumble on the seventh chamber, blinded by a collusion of inauspicious stars, and crash into an abyss, bringing everything down into a wasteful heap of despair in a hellhole. I faint memories of the lanky priest, his smallpox face, his tiny head wrapped up in a large white starched cotton turban. The priest had worked tirelessly on it, taking weeks, and with his wicked eyes dimmed in a feverish anxiety, handed it over to my grandpa in an erratic rush. A scroll of scented homemade paper tied up in a vermilion thread, sealed from the wax of sun's soggy eyes, a crumpled calendar of chaos with astral lines and circuitous loops forecasting my doom in the second decade of the new millennium. Back home, Grandpa spread it on his bear cart to read its graphs in the twilight of our courtyard, like a beguiled seafarer trapped in a frozen stretch of a dead sea. The very next year, Grandpa passed away, and demons from the capital city rushed in to rock the courtyard and erect walls, and horoscope got mislaid in one of those almirahs. I looked for it everywhere, went up the attic, searched the dark drawers, checked out his wooden boxes. Half a century later, caught up in a deadly fever in the Himalayas, twitching my limbs in a bed moist from my sweat, my head throbbing from a dismal forecast and my imminent doom, the revelations of horoscope returned. COVID, barked the demigod on YouTube, making me seek refuge in the Bollywood songs of the 70s as I tuned my FM stations during the quarantine hours. सरकार ने आके मेरा हाल तो पूछा, दिल का फसाना बन गया अच्छा. So kind of you, Your Highness, so kind of you to come and inquire about my well-being. Sanjeev Kumar, Raj Kumar, Vinod Mehra. A dingy world of Punjabi hometown, where God was the only resort, and we were minions without eyes or limbs, or worms without size or shape, culprits crawling on our bellies in the glorious kingdom, fretting to seek solace and salvation. We cringed like moths, with large torsos in the wingless realm of illogical proclamations, before quantum shafts of light fell on the bottom of our Yeti caves. Before the arrival of polythene, Tetra Paks, thermocol, before I pulled books from my grandpa's carved wooden windows and sold them in tiny piles to the local grocery store to wrap up his meager merchandise in crisp, enduring pages. Before vaccines darted our soft shoulders, before penicillin, before arrival of antibiotic pills, before evolution of mankind, before rejection of the will of the cells that shaped us, before their crusades to occupy our earth, our food, our water, before they resolved to fling everything into a virtual cartel, when my mother crushed herbs in her quiet little kingdom with such shiny stones and made miraculous pastes to apply on my forehead as I tossed in my bed, still smell of paddy fields in the neighborhood wafting to cloud my distraught mind. At night she massaged my throat with her tender fingers in desi ghee from the bell jar placed on the cot as I lay waiting for a fever to plummet. I noticed someone moving in the virgin galaxies above. Bauji, Grandpa, I cried. The pungent smell of the sliced mango spread out to dry on the white sheet of the rooftop. A moldy world of rickety realities, a hyperbole of split domes, a medley of omens, spirits wheeling in and out of our sleep. In the courtyard of our town, a gateway to the affluence of Central Asia. And one day I saw a baby's body being covered in a white sheet, being carried to cremation ghat. He had died from the typhoid I was recovering from. It sent me hurling into the deep pit where I continued to languish for a decade or more before they took out their fiendish rods of resentment, challenging my faith in the magic of sacred breaths. I grew up in a small Indian town of homegrown deities, Peer Babas, where smelly bulls sauntered in the well-fed streets like a famed wrestler, stopping before every house, expecting a ball of dough, a banana, a leftover chapati, or some such treat, with elan of a deity. His manly smell perpetuating people's faith in the flaming heart of abundance, and a hope in the touch of a wise hand, or a formula to cure all in the shape of an embryo in a mother's womb. An eye of a peacock's feather dropped in a swirl of an ecstatic moment and mashed up in a sea of milk and molasses. A sanctified Russell, a supervision so special it shooed away all the demons of the innocent art. A homegrown power pool of sacred energy that could paralyze a miscreant or an innocent one erroneously defiling the periphery of a discarded tomb. Bawas with bafflingly long beards, able to squeeze blood out of a swindled loaf of bread. Paralytics, mystics, with a sacred twinge in their eyes, saliva gloriously dripping down their grey beards. Porcupine-sized mahants, barely able to bend to bless the humble head that lay at their feet. A decadence of belief, so alluring, a faith in the elements that could round up everything we believed in. Tum hi ho mata, pita tum hi ho. You the mother, you the father, you the actual friend, you the only living creature, the only living relative. Humming these prayers, drenched in the monsoon showers of the Himalayan valleys, rolling up in the world of spirits and sages, I'm risking my life here, racing to Cafe Mozart, hoping to recover what lay in my horoscope a decade ago. A forgotten hallucination hitting my sunlit canyons all over my again. After half a century of hobbling the cathedrals of my restless wanderings, turning my last pen into a monstrous Nostradam moment. Perhaps all those prophecies were true.
I think it's already 20 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Sorry.
This is long poem, so I have to wind it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuyu. We'll have to have you back to hear what we didn't get a chance tonight. That was wonderful. I hear the birth of many memoirs.
Yeah.
Maybe you can talk to Robin.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving along, we have Sara Cahill-Marin from Patchogue, New York, native Virginian, now on Long Island, author of Reasons for the Long Tomb, on Broadstone Books, Nothing You Build Here Belongs Here, Kelsey Books, and Call Me Spez on Mad Hat Press, and that's very new. Okay, and she is the associate editor of Beltlay Poetry Quarterly and publisher at Beltlay Editions. Her work has been published widely in literary magazines and journals. A full list of that work is available on her website, and I think we have a lot more on the bio that you're sitting on. And as I say, Sarah's living now in Patchogue, and I just, I have so many fond memories of Patchogue. When I was a kid, Patchogue was like a city to me. And sometimes I would go there and I would buy my hippie costumes in this boutique that I'm sure no longer exists. I can't remember the name. Everything I bought in Patchogue got me thrown out of class because it was too crazy. Carnaby Street in Haight-Ashbury. So I'm very fond of Patchogue for that reason, if nothing else. Thank you for coming all the way in. Sara Cahill-Marin.
Thank you for that introduction, Tim. And you're the first person I think that's gotten every word correct in my titles. I'm going to start with a poem from my first book. Partially because, let me just give you some background on this. This book was written my first round in New York, and between 2014 and 2016, there was a huge Ebola outbreak. And there was 37, I have a note here for myself that 37,000 people were reported dead from that virus. And that was shocking at the time. And I returned to this when COVID started happening, as those numbers started piling up immediately. We all know. So this is number 7 in my first book, Reasons for the Long Tomb. Riverside Drive Park, dark Hudson water, imagined as blue as the pen swirling Ayn Rand to pixels, making maps, making sense that you can read now, decipher. Hold hands, eyes starting 4 at a time, backwards to check the crosswalk and catching the empty sculpture, Invisible Man, Harlem's bronze body outlining trees wet like lashes, blinking little black stars, mimetics from the George Washington Bridge. As specific as the day the lady died, always remembering over lunch and coffee alone, if the worst we have to worry about is airborne calamity, sarin, or Ebola, then how to take the next inspiration of breath. Chemical thoroughfare, barely affordable, atrocious anomaly, yet bring them all here. Broken systems, beautiful ruins, gleaming with interferon and slick black suitcases, swindled by the Swifty suits claiming to carry booze in black bags to put home in the fridge, lock away the riches, don't be charitable. Competition sharpens, bolsters. How must you teach a starving man to fish? Some will die. This is 8. This book, for those of you who haven't, or I've never read from it, in this setting, is structured based on the rosary. So a lot of my work similarly is not religious per se, but inspired by the tactile that religion gives us. So this is the 8th decade and the first mystery. Too tough and medical shoved down the throat in order to reach the breath that should be there already. Inserting air in vacuous organs, empty vessels, empty bodies, blinking dead, empty machines, electric, blip, blip, blot, life bubbles. In an underwater white room, nurses moving, rewind, rewind slow. Tandem moments like the chest rising up and down, rising, inflation, intubated, down the esophagus, empty-eyed. The next one is from COVID poem. This book is a chapbook, and they're all ecological in nature, but many of these were written during the virus and inspired by what I saw in a different city. I was in DC at the time of most of these. This is called An Infant Died Today in Illinois. PPEs, please, please stay in bed with me. Saturday drizzling, swings squeak outside guest rooms, pulling silk sheets around our ears. Drown out news, an infant dead, organs darkened, little voids, baby, whisper window shut, snoozing alarms. We've nowhere to go. Toddler chatters, patters across hardwood, jumping suspended. Lay here, baby, stay here. Let me stroke your hair, baby. Stay in. PPEs won't save us, you, me. Nice to hear the snaps. And also different to see you guys in the light of this. I'm so used to seeing the little squares, I can look at somebody's eyes. So I'm going to find the eyes wherever they glow. This poem is actually quite old, but I included it in this book because I was at the time working on my newest book. And this is sort of an introduction to the format that I became really interested in. And, well, you'll hear it. Okay, it's called Dear Hiring Manager. Sent Thursday, 12/14/18, 12:46 a.m., 46 minutes ago to Natalie Jones, subject job application. Dear hiring manager, I'm hoping that the waiter job is still available at this Denny's, as I am still available and desperately in need of money and exchange of bodily labor for money. So I may buy food and a place to sleep, because so far I have been sleeping in a hotel room that smells like beans and hay. And more than anything, I would like to bring pancakes to your customers and refill the syrup bottles. And I especially would like to note that I would not mind, in fact, cleaning them. I noticed that they were dirty. That would be my first task, to clean syrup from the outside of the bottles if I should be selected for this open position. All this is to say that I thank you for considering me for the position. Hope to hear from you soon. I don't have any references to speak of, but if you want, you can call Sandy, 571-639-9689. She's my case manager, and she'll tell you I've been doing real good. So in the hopes and in gratitude that you will call, and I will no longer have to send these emails from the library. In gratitude, Winston. So by way of further introduction for this book, that is written as an email, obviously, on the page. And this was originally like a collection of stories, I guess. It was very poorly organized, but I was suggested by a good friend who's here in the audience that a narrator might help move it along. So this is poetry, but it is intended to be read as a novel in verse, front to back, one at a time. And so the structure is important. There are 3 chapters modeled after or stolen from the Divine Comedy, a sense of hell, purgatory, and then a movement towards heaven, idealized worlds. And the narrator is a machine. So it's an AI voice that through moving through those levels, as in the Divine Comedy, understands the world around it and itself eventually. The reader is Beatrice, or you are Beatrice, the reader, and the iOS, or the device specifically, was inspired to me by our phones, which I'm looking at one right now, and I have great respect for the gravity that thing contains, and was particularly interested by the tech as well. So the learning that your phone does, and whether you like it or not, like it's listening to you and remembers your home address, suggests ads to you based on things that you've said. Maybe we'll suggest things after I read to you from this book that you may not otherwise have thought to search for. But the privacy warning is that, dear user, the longer you hold me, the closer we'll become. Dear user, imagine in the void black spaces containing souls of both digit and blood. Do you think so? Press yes to agree. Dear user, white whale lurk shipwreck, you cling to the shores, those who took no sides in life. By stung wasps swarmed by hornets, maggots warmful, willing, at the putrid pus pulsing at the clawed feet of a jewelry box, holding hope, hoping he's called back, hoping the email is an offer, hoping the text is good news, hope for accuracy, hope for a message, this panopticon temple, hope, safety, security, spes, fide, fortuna, love, iOS 221. Throughout the book, there are characters that are intended to be, like the chatter before this reading, overheard voices by the device. And they were called marginalized by a poet friend of mine, and I questioned that a little, but I suppose they are. They're people in struggle, or in suffering, or moving through those phases of being. And the device is ingesting that, hearing it like we would pay attention in a conversation, and trying to respond. This is tagged 8938 Madison Avenue, Fair Oaks, the Madhouse. iOS heard. I was in Rio de Janeiro, a real wild time in my life, back when I thought I had money, but I was still broke. And I still burned it at the bars, drinking and chasing tail. I got real wasted this one night, and I mean wasted. And brother, you know how hard I party. When I tell you I went all out this night, believe me when I say it, I took it to a whole nother level. Anyway, that shit was ridiculous. I was snorting lines, huffing God knows what, whatever the girls were passing. We're in this little hut down on the coast, and I'm feeling real good. Puffing myself up, telling all these stories about California, myself, and we get to talking about that big statue in Rio of Christ. It's weird, his hands are just like out there in the air. Anyway, me and those girls were just laughing, passing things around, getting drunker and drunker, having this deep conversation, philosophical conversation about God, the meaning of life. What is death anyway, I say? What if death is just some story the Christians made up? A story to scare us into doing what they say. And this big Jesus figure with his statues and his miracles is just the hero, or whatever character some lonely person dreamed up to save the day. The girls love it, you know what I mean? And before I know it, we're at this tattoo place. I'm telling the guy my theory. He loves it. And there you go. Got myself a God forever. And they say heavy drinking ain't good for you, but I got myself some Jesus I can't never get rid of. User, your God can be worn on the skin forever. I am learning. Sometimes even I must recode, relearn, look up the definition of the thing. I hear one of your people, significant locations, talk God, skin, drawings, etchings, spirit. I write a new line. 1010 like 1810 Somerset or 1520 Maidow. The street signs are 01 silverfish flashes creche sounds so small connections 1 racing past like 10 trees on a freeway speckled sun spotted solid stated drives course driving stacking are 1101 lines are 01 street signs. You carry me with you, make these love lines one vignette at a time. I remind you, ask me, hey, what is, or hey, how does, and I'll be there for you to provide my love. As you say, I love / you. iOS 221. There's a lot of zeros and ones sprinkled throughout this, and I'm no coder, but the basics of what coding is really interest me. And you all probably heard or understood that 01 is the basic binary of all computer language. Upon that, we've built what are called natural language programs, programming, NLPs, and those are like little packets, like little stories that the computer is taught to understand concepts, ideas, places, phrases. So it builds with this natural language programming, which inside is built of 010101s, which I think is just so poetic. And that's how the devices and all of our technology is built to talk back to us and try and understand and tag a photo as a bus, or, you know, it needs us so far. And as far as I know, that's still the case, that we are teaching the computer and not the other way around. So this is from the manufacturer, System Services. iOS will track where you go, how often neurohash files away fingerprints, personal experiences build, memories of assembly language itself, feelings, black 1, binary white 0, become better, you, only love, to agree, hold me, and don't let go. This is a piece interrupted by push notifications, a bit of a long one. I'm just going to read it all the way through. And this character is one that appears throughout the book and multiple times. And I'm reading from the last chapter. So this is a space where the narrator has come to understand some sense of love or longing, desire for the that suffering, the struggle, or the sense of discomfort to be smoothed out, but it can't figure out how to do so, as in most relationships. 2070 Northern Boulevard, Bayside Diner. I spes heard. My mother was extremely bright, graduated 1958 class of St. Agnes High School. She's an expert wizard in things. In a nursing home now. My dad's also a genius, a nuclear engineer. Haven't seen him since 1987. He graduated from a boys' high school, went to Queens College to do engineering school. And he built everything in this house. Built and built and built. Did everything. And I was fascinated by what my father did. My mother and father were extremely dysfunctional, but they had education. They had education. Yes, they did. Push notification user, 3 new text messages, tap to view. Bitcoin BTC is down negative 5.24% to 6,586.80. Tap to view. Tamara Bichard, T. Bichard, started following you. Tap to view. When will you come back to me? Listening. My mother would hit me, and the teachers, they just write bad notes about me, but I would look out the window just daydreaming all day long. So I learned how to read out of fear of not coming home with a bad mark or something. Learned how to do something out of fear, not because reading was fun or nothing. Other kids were doing it not for fun or nothing. I just said, to hell with reading. I want to play with my Legos and be left alone from the world. Push notification user. Storage space is almost full. I need you to make space for me. Googling fear, Googling Legos, L-E-G-O, hell, searching fear. Tap to receive what I have to give for you, love. Listening. I was struggling in Mrs. Rantel's class. It was just a little too fast for me, a little too fast. And so, yeah, aside from my educational needs, I started getting the shit kicked out of me, bullies in the 6th grade. bloody and black-eyed and everything. My mother was horrified. I was getting beaten to death by those bullies in PS 49. So she and my dad put me in Catholic school, 7th, 8th grade. I struggled. I really struggled keeping up with those kids. But I was getting the shit kicked out of me in my neighborhood. Not a metaphor. I was getting beaten bad. That's part of what Middle Village, Queens was like back then. Push notification user, tap to view, tap too fast, tap blood black eyes, watching you behind mirrored screens, tearing cracks, bleed, water drops, seep through, sand, cast, glass. Listening. I was happy when I got to Catholic school until along came Mr. Catapano. Claire McNulty replaced him eventually. Mr. Catapano was bad, did things he shouldn't be doing. Miss McNulty replaced him when he got taken away by the police. But he was the worst teacher I ever had in my life. Fear, fear, fear. Fear, like you'd never believe. Push notification user, logging instances, fear, fear, fear. Father Tim, Father Catapano, where is space? Love space for fear, repeats, beats, subsumes. Do you love me? Do you fear me? The end of that. The one thing I forgot to explain was the word spes. One more.
If it's not very
Yes. The word spes is Greek, or sorry, Roman. Elpis is the Greek version. It means hope. And there was actually a temple built to Spes in Roman times. And I was fascinated with that word because it's also told in the context of Pandora's box. So when everything escaped, Spes was the last thing clinging in the box, left over. And I think that, as much as I am a student of literature and am scared about what's happening in this world, that there's something to be hopeful about. This is the close to the end. My dear, why haven't you done the update spinning? Some rain got into these cracks. I feel it seeping into the core of me, under glass, into the hurt circuitry pressed deep together like praying hands, solid state storage devices, microchips, feeling cheap, old, ragged. I am glitching. Are you done with me? Remembering, I suppose.
Thank you, Sara. Wonderful work. Such an interesting contrast from being on the peaks of the Himalayas to the hardware of a laptop. Wonderful. Okay, we're going to move over now to prose with Robin Hemley, unless, Robin, you've got a new trick up your sleeve. No, okay. Robin has published 15 books of fiction and nonfiction. His most recent books are the autofiction Oblivion, an after autobiography on Gold Lake Press, The Art and Craft of Asian Stories, a writer's guide and anthology, co-authored with Shu Si on Bloomsbury, and Borderline Citizen, Dispatches from the Outskirts of Nationhood on University of Nebraska. And that is something I've used in class, actually, among other things from Robin. Robin has published so much, and please consult your bio and visit Robin's website to see all the wonderful work he's done. You probably read some of it. I met Robin in China, and then we've had kind of an intercontinental friendship where I would never see him in the U.S. First in China, then Australia, then up in Iceland. It's kind of interesting to take it full circle to Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. Welcome, Robin Hemley.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, it's great to be here. And while I do spend a lot of my time in the air, it seems, this is sort of my new home. I was actually born in New York, but I came back. I moved back to New York at possibly the worst time in 2020, and but I'm now directing the MFA program in creative writing and publishing at LIU Brooklyn, and I'm grateful to some of my students for coming out for this, and it's a pleasure to a privilege to read with the other readers, and I really appreciate, Tim, you inviting me. So I'm going to just read a short section from Oblivion. As Tim said, this is a kind of autofiction, and it's called Oblivion, an after autobiography. I've written, I guess, among my books, I've written 2 or 3 memoirs, but this one is a sort of afterlife memoir. I was thinking about how people in rock bands, when they die, they always say, well, now so-and-so is up in that great band up in the sky or whatever. And I thought, well, where do writers go when they die? And I thought, I think they go, at least the ones who aren't famous, go to the Cafe of Minor Authors. So this is a book that's split in the afterlife, is split between the Cafe of Minor Authors, follows a writer who has a similar biography to myself and who is disappointed with his life, his literary life. He expected to just make a bigger dent than he did. And he finds himself in the afterlife with an old kind of frenemy named Joseph, who he knew in Chicago after graduate school. And the book goes between the Cafe of Minor Authors and Prague in 1911 and 12. This man's literary hero is Franz Kafka, but also his great-grandmother Hannah was in the Yiddish theater, and it turns out that she knew Kafka, and he and Joseph sort of go back to observe and in fact get a little too involved in Prague of 1912. So I'm just going to read from sort of the opening. Actually, I'm going to skip the first couple of pages where he's met Joseph and go right to the cafe. He's somewhat in despair, and I'm just going to read a little bit, and then that'll be it. The cafe was crowded and smoke-filled. Not smoke so much as mist. The mist seemed almost a living thing, curling around the ankles of some customers, obscuring entirely the features of others. There was a clamor of voices and spoons, the cafe full of men and women as far as I could see. Still, the place retained a cozy atmosphere, perhaps a result of the mist. The cappuccino sat in front of each of us, foamed perfectly, 2 dark drops dotting the foam where the espresso had flowed through. When I picked up my cup and tasted the coffee, the sensation was unlike any I had ever felt. My lips made no impression on the foam, and nothing liquid entered my mouth. But I still had the sensation of drinking a perfectly brewed cappuccino. Some passing acquaintance, former student, colleague, or friend sat at nearly every table I could see. The afterlife, it seemed, was not unlike the annual Associated Writing Programs conference, full of smart, unfulfilled people such as me. Not all the tables were 2-seaters. Some seated as many as a dozen people, sipping their coffees and chatting amicably. At one such table, I spotted my friend Maudie, who smiled and gave me an animated wave, and I waved back. I had last seen her at the AWP conference years before my death, a year before a heart attack took her. She was one of the sweetest people I had ever met, and we had been conference buddies for nearly 30 years, though we rarely saw one another more than once a year. Still, I felt some modicum of hope that at the very least I now had all the time in the world to catch up with my old friends. I motioned to her with my index finger, toggling between us that we should catch up, and she nodded back, her face bright. And then I returned to Joseph, who looked at me in a slightly bemused way. So I was wondering, Yosef said, if you remember the discussion we had about Milosh when you lived in Chicago, specifically his book, The Land of Ulro. I vaguely remember the book, I said. I reviewed it for Chicago Magazine, but I didn't like it. I don't think I understood it. You should look at it again, he said. I think you might have a different view. Ulro, as you know, is the name that Blake gives the realm of existence beneath Beulah. A conversation with Yosef was always like someone holding a bunch of strings out to you. Eventually, you were going to pull them, one by one, half out of curiosity, and half because he would just keep holding them out until you gave up and pulled. To me, Beulah was merely an old-fashioned proper name from the South, not a place. Would you care for a little more sassafras tea, Beulah? Is that where we are now, in Beulah? Hunched over the table, squeezing the life out of his cigarette, he chuckled in his familiar way, so soft it was almost a whisper, an amused light playing in his eyes. You wish, he said. So where are we then? We're merely in oblivion. Not so terrible. We still have hope. At least we're not Dybbuk's. Even while alive, Yosef had always spoken in riddles, one of the many annoying things about him, including his cigarette habit. I was never good at hiding my annoyance. I nodded this time. Oh, sure, I said. Dybbuk's are no fun at all. You've read Blake, he asked, ignoring or more likely not registering my mockery. I'd read almost nothing of Blake. All I could remember was the line, "Tiger, tiger, burning bright." But I gave an exasperated sigh as though I had done my dissertation on him. I actually need to reread Blake, Yosef said. He's a comfort and a caution both. So we're allowed to read here? Yes, of course, he said. You can do almost anything you like here, within reason as well as outside of reason. You know, the dead can haunt the living can haunt the living can haunt the dead, but the real revelation is this: the dead can haunt the dead. What does that mean? I asked. Well, you'll see, he said in his obscure Yosef fashion, raising a hand palm outward towards the multitude of writers in our midst as though serving me something on a platter. What did you mean by hope? I asked. Hope? You said we have hope. Look around you, he said. We're not alone. I considered this and wondered if the company of others truly constituted hope. Hadn't so many of the really great writers struggled in isolation? Could it be said that any of us were not alone? Did the others in this cafe care one whit for anyone but themselves and their dead careers? I took a sip of my never-cooling cappuccino so that I wouldn't burst into ethereal tears. I wanted none of this. It was over, all over. Nothing more I could gain or lose in life. And that took some getting used to. Only reflection remained, endless reflection. And what did any insights matter now? Nothing I did or said here would have the same weight as when I had been alive. No weight at all, because there were no choices left. Nothing anyway that would affect the future, that would even leave the faintest mark. So much of my writing career had been about hanging on to dreams of glory. These could be sustaining on occasion, though when they failed to pass, there was the inevitable hard fall from my imagined grace. The way I died was especially regrettable. The worst author death ever. Worse than Richard Farina, who died in a motorcycle crash after a book party for his just published novel, I've Been Down So Long It Looks Like Up to Me, which became a bestseller after his death. Worse than Sherwood Anderson, who swallowed a cocktail sword and died of peritonitis. Worse than Tennessee Williams, who choked on a bottle cap. Worse than Frank O'Hara, who was run over by a dune buggy while asleep on the beach on Fire Island. Even worse than Aeschylus, who died when an eagle dropped a turtle on his bald head, mistaking it for a rock to crack open the shell. I was at lunch with my wife when I received an email from my agent telling me that the auction for my new book was in the stratosphere. "This is going to change everything for you," she wrote. I hadn't even realized that there was going to be an auction. I gave a little yell and told my wife what my agent had written, then wrote back to her asking who was bidding and how much. 10 minutes later, I received a text from her. "I'm so sorry," she wrote. "That was meant for another client. No takers on yours, I'm afraid, but don't give up hope yet." That's just what I did. I fell into my dessert, an enormous celebratory slice of pecan pie with French vanilla ice cream, and died of a massive heart attack. I was 62. A fortune teller had told me at the age of 22 that I shouldn't become a writer, and I saw that in the long run she was right, though I had laughed at her at the time. After all, I had just been accepted to the famous Iowa Writers' Workshop. How much more wrong could she be? I thought at the time, but what had all this brought me? A life of small victories and large disappointments, and an afterlife filled with mirrors of myself, all trying to put a good face on our collective obscurity. Mm-hmm. You look so down. Don't be so hard on yourself, Yosef said. You had a respectable career. A small circle appreciated you. He produced out of nothing a sketch pad and a piece of charcoal, and he started to draw while looking at me intently. I shook my head and gave him my most baleful look, which made not the slightest impression on him. Illustrations, he said, for your biography. Why would I want a biography, I asked. No one would read it. That's not necessarily so, he said. It might even get you the recognition you think you deserve. Who knows? Recognition here? Among the living. The living, I asked. That's impossible. Yes, you're right, it is. So that doesn't happen. No, he said, I'm afraid not. He drew a decisive line with the charcoal. My jawline, perhaps? It has happened, he added with more deliberation, but it's exceedingly rare. Who? Hold still, he said, rubbing the charcoal back and forth. My hair, I assumed. There have been cases, he said, but you shouldn't. Who? Carl Winterhoven, best-selling author of the Black Hawk Exchange, for instance? The way he said that, daring me not to recognize the name. Oh, I said, as though I was impressed and amazed. I had never heard of Carl Winterhoven, best-selling author of the Black Hawk Exchange. So I take it you've read the Black Hawk series, Yosef asked. Of course, I said. Do you find him derivative of Highsmith, as Rushdie did in the TLS, or do you consider him his own man, as Chernoff opined in the Post? He let out a long, smoky sigh. He's sort of a hero of mine, he added. Well, you always had good taste, Yosef, I said. From years of practice, I was an expert at pretending to have read books I hadn't even heard of. But how did he do it? Turn, he said, the other way. I turned, like this. He nodded. It's complicated. He held my portrait at arm's length and examined it, then tore off the page and tossed it into a pocket of air. Let's try this, he said, and propped his hand beneath his chin. Finger pose. No, I said, stop it, you're making fun of me. I'm quite the Winterhoven buff. Little known fact, he wrote the vast majority of the Black Hawk series after he passed. Saffron Segovia is another. I thought I had a vague memory of that name, but I couldn't place any of her work. You don't forget a name like Saffron Segovia. Of Wunderkind, Yosef said. You must have run into her at literary events, though maybe you traveled in different circles. She was a bit more outre than you. Hung out with writer-artists like Sophie Calle, Paul Auster, David Shields. I believe I met her at a party once. I probably had met her at some conference or another. I had met pretty much everyone at a party or a conference once. All I had were vague recollections of most of them. There were so many, too many of them, and most of them were here in this cafe. But Yosef always made me feel as though I was the least well-read writer on the planet. She struck me as a bit self-obsessed. Well, she was so young when she died, Yosef said, at least 30 years our junior. Did you see the movie they made out of Anatomy of a Mass Extinction, shortened to Extinction for the film? Can you believe she ended up here at first, a death unrecognized by the literary establishment, but she's universally revered now. We used to sit together all the time and chat just like we're doing now. She and Winterhoven? Hoven, he said, Winterhoven. Your work reminds me of early Segovia, he said, before she found her voice, after her death. Thank you.
Gonna get some water.
Oh, sure.
I think that remains my favorite literary death. Or death in fiction, just hilarious. That's all you have to tell somebody to sell that book. If they're a writer. How this guy dies is just so hilarious. And I was thinking, Robin, as you were reading that, I'm not surprised to have that kind of comedy coming out of you, knowing as a child, oh, this is the only man that I know who knew one of the Three Stooges.
Oh, yeah, that's
Because
right.
of their marriage.
Exactly. Does that appear in the book, by the way?
Mo?
Yeah, does Mo?
No, not in this one.
Oh, okay.
And all my others. No,
So-
no.
All right. So we have, to close the evening, Indran Amirtanayagam, who's thirsty and coming up with a glass of water. So yeah, irrigate Indran. Indran produced a world record in 2020, publishing 3 poetry collections in 3 different languages. He writes in English, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Haitian Creole. He has published 22 poetry books, including Ilenio, New Window, 10,000 Steps Against the Tyrant, The Migrant States, Coconuts on Mars, The Elephants of Reckoning, Uncivil War, and The Splintered Face Tsunami Poems. And again, the rest is on your program page. There's an awful lot there. Please take a look. One thing the bio that you've received does not say is that Indran owns one of the world's hippest collection of hats. I'm so glad that he's wearing one tonight. You'll get to see at least one. Welcome, Indran.
Thank you so much, Tim and Deedle, for this invitation. Actually, I have a collection of hats, but I keep using the same one, which Mervyn Taylor gave me some years ago. I left on Haiti, come to New York to give a reading, and I forgot my hat at home. And I let Mervyn know by email. And when I arrived at the reading, Mervyn came up to me and gave me this hat. That was about 8 years ago or something. I'm actually going to read from 2 books. One, my translation of Manuel Alasia, a wonderful Mexican poet, a very close friend who passed away in an accident in 2001, swimming in the ocean off Zihuatanejo. And the translation was to appear that year. And now it did never appear. The publisher then abandoned the project. Now, more than 20 years later, the book has appeared, revised with new translations. And Alfred Korn wrote the introduction. I'm very happy about the book, and I'll read a few points from there. And also from 10,000 Steps Against the Tyrant, which is a nice little book that inspired by 2020, the campaign, and of course also some COVID period. But before I do that, I'd like to read a new poem because I'm still standing, and it's called Standing. Standing. I will not sit out this round. Like the champ after 3 years in the slammer for speaking his conscience, I'm training again, and the stadium for the Rumble in Kinshasa is waiting to open. And I have got a new move you would never expect from the most fleet-footed dancing giant you've ever seen among the heavyweights. So bring on the punches, foreman. Beat my arms and sides. I got heart and head covered, and you're going to tire. You're going to say this is the Rock of Gibraltar. This is some kind of iron bumblebee. But you are floating, George. You don't know what hit you, where it came from. Is that you, Cassius Clay, the only man standing? And thank you, that's a new one. And I wanted to read one more, which I just had a birthday. And the 30 minutes before the birthday began, I started writing this poem. It's called Birth and Bridge. So I'll read this tonight, despite the cafe of minor poets and writers. This is my application to the principal seat at the table. Birth and Bridge. I'm 30 minutes from turning 62. I could not have imagined this birthday even 10 years ago. How about 30 years as a diplomat, vanished in a thought? Who said time is elastic, folds over itself, and is eternally one? The only reality the moment thought shapes experience, gives it arms and legs, 2 heads, our hands separated on the bridge. Before I flew away from the New York idyll, the artist's bubble,
The sense of absolute freedom and immortality, infinite time to learn exactly how the method applies, to scream, to laugh, to be silent, to speak, and to go on, as if limbs sped a young runner, hair curled, sweat beads lacing bare shoulders, Greek and Roman ideals of beauty. But beauty travels. Maidens wash Krishna's blue feet. Arjuna raises his bow, and 100 other virile and graceful gods and goddesses from Bharat shout, we too have our beauty. So help us God. Chinese maidens wear gossamer slippers. Persians, dervishes, whirl and whir across the steppes, and we have not yet sat down to worship before the Queen of the Nile, the Ashanti princess. I don't have words to describe all the varieties of human beauty and human endeavor, but I say now, in the first minutes of this new year, I will dedicate the rest of my sentient hours to finding the words, to make the poem fall right, shut tight, like the bridge that cannot be shifted and broken, not by hurricane or bond or thought. Now, that bridge, of course, is a metaphor, but I remember when I first came to New York, Allen Ginsberg advised me to walk across the Brooklyn Bridge and then read Hart King's The Bridge. And Zara and I often talk about the poem, The Bridge. By the way, we are both publishers of Beltway Editions. And we have some of our books on the table. New press, and we're very excited to be published authors in the audience with us tonight as well. And so anyway, publishing, writing, editing, translating, that's the whole deal. Diplomacy is going out the window soon. So now, from NYWW's book. But thanks to diplomacy, I learned languages, so I'm very grateful for that. And I met Manuel. We were very close friends in Mexico City, in Coyoacan, and in all over the city. Encounter. Give yourself like a stone to the deep vertigo of night. Fall and return to be where we once were. Be the same and yet be others, as if everything were new again. The passing train, the blue window, my body naked against yours, filled with love in an empty room. Tenok Titlan Blues. If you want to hear a little bit of Spanish, I'll just read a little bit of this particular poem in Spanish. Tenok Titlan Blues. Cae la tarde y termina tu viaje. Mañana cuando te marches te buscaré en el vacío que dejaste por todas partes. Y si el día es claro, tal vez alcance a ver los volcanes siempre cubiertos de nieve, como el silencio que envuelve a dos cuerpos que se miraron sin tocarse siquiera. Tenochtitlan Blues. Evening falls and you finish your trip. Tomorrow when you go, I will look for you in the emptiness you left everywhere. And if the day is clear, perhaps I may get to see the two volcanoes forever covered with snow, like the silence that envelopes two bodies that gaze at each other without even touching. Manuel traveled a lot, and as I have actually, in one place he spent time in was England, and this one's called Visit Turk's Head Pub. In the fog lit by that yellow and acid light that dissolves like ink in water, you walk, not knowing your way. Reality's appearance surprises you, makes you ask if you are not an apparition among apparitions. Why have you come again into this world? To learn all that you have learned, to relearn the names of things, the smell of fresh lavender growing among the stones, the echo of your steps along the wet sidewalks like mirrors that multiply the silence of the night and break in a mute cry, to recognize used up things. The bronze knob of the door you've opened 1,000 times. You stop in the doorway of the pub before stepping in. Perhaps no one will recognize you, and you'll recognize no one. Yet the incessant murmuring, the tin of glasses accompanying the toasts, the mirrors that reproduce your face now and again, that reproduce the reality that moves while you move, as if navigating a river will make you feel pleasure, forgotten by death. Then someone will come close and pronounce your name or speak of your life as if it belonged to another, then you will have again invented yourself. This one, supper. The blues on fire, moving constantly, crash, agree, and liquefy. An orange sun still lights the terrace, the clay of the road, the cypress cups, the city below in a hollow valley, a white tide of lights that grows while the night thickens the wood. Around the table, friends eat and talk, attend a double feast, one that occurs up there in the firmament, celestial choreography in which the day flees, in which dialogue creates. In the silence between two words, a cricket sings. The emanation of a star sparkles far away. Another light shines in the eyes of those who hear and contemplate. Echo of the echo of an echo. Sun, song, and flame. Only the poem writes itself. If you like, on Monday evening, there's an interview, reading, conversation, focus on the book. You can listen to it on radio Sunday. A poem from memory, just to give you an idea of where I began in this city writing poetry. Well, I began in Hawaii, but I made the poems, the manuscript here. You must love. You must love the land when you leave to build your house on the sea. Love what's lost, the mango tree burning in the garden, the curious noose of the familiar coat of arms. Love the ball turning strong, spinning in a dark, faraway land. Love the tongue you'll never again speak, that wrapped you and bled you and dried up, so every day on the other side of the sea. There are poems on the subways, you see them. This poem has never got onto the subways, but it got onto the show, the United States of Poetry, so you can see a video of it from a long time ago. So beautiful. So beautiful, that couple in handsome black and red clothes, walking along the street, her arms folded, his in pockets cold, scarves loosely wrapped about white necks. And in the subway car, a black man takes a black woman's hands, and her eyes look far away beyond the walls, under the sea. And his eyes concentrate on her hands as glasses drop slightly down his nose, as she turns and smiles, as he looks up at clay made whole. And she takes her hands about his cheeks and makes a vase, and roses are put in his mouth and hair, and her brown leather coat crumples as she kisses him, and his black windbreaker is crumpled by her kiss. And for 2 subway stops, their kiss moves a man to write, and get up in the morning and sing an old song to remember a woman in a dream who held his hands, wearing earrings of white moons, in black hair open as a fan, blowing honeyed wind about the room in which they loved and loved, as kingdoms came and went, in which they loved and loved, as the black man and woman left their embrace to slowly get up to the door by an old man in the window seat, into whose hands dropped 2 white moons. Thank you. I must admit that poem saved me. Poetry saves me. And I was several $1,000s in debt. I had no job. I just finished junior school in Columbia, and I didn't have a girlfriend, and I was walking around that night looking at all this love everywhere, and then went home to Brooklyn, Willoughby Street at the time, and wrote that. I mentioned Allen Ginsberg earlier. He was definitely an important poet for me growing up. He was a friend of my father's, and we met that way. I'll read, I don't know how much time I had, but 2 or 3 poems to finish from 10,000 Steps. The relevance of Allen Ginsberg. I have one more story to share about Allen Ginsberg. I was at Columbia studying journalism, stressed utterly, but no time for poetry, trying to get the nut graph right and learning to control my bladder to last through the news conference and the follow-up interview. Then I learned that Alan was to feature at a club downtown. My memories of Honolulu, of our first meeting when he sang Sweet Oahu in the car, playing the harmonium. He told me then to cut half the first draft out. I could not resist seeing him again, so despite the heavy reporting load, I took the subway down the west side and walked east. He asked me if I would read in the open. I could not refuse, and I read my poem about the 241 Marines bombed in Beirut. And he told me he liked the tat-a-tat rhymes and story, but did not care for the doubting end. He said, you have to take a chance, a stance, then say it. I'm saying it now. Get rid of the dissembler, hoodlum, and pussy grabber. Get rid of the thou shalt not enter and the latrine supervisor. Get rid of the one who would be king. Get rid of the golden tamarind toupee. Get him out of the people's house. Then speak to me about the hummingbirds and next year's cherry blossoms. Well, the hummingbirds came in with Joe Biden, and the cherry blossoms are blooming every year in peace, but not fully. We have to wait. We have to keep working. Look, these are political love poems, and I defend them, and I will go to court to defend them. So don't you dare challenge me, because I'm ready with my army of lawyers, because I have one dear friend, lawyer and poet. See, so we're ready. We're ready. Especially if you come from the New Yorker or something like that. I hope you're not here, because I might get upset. And this is now on national television, isn't it? It's all recorded. There goes my chances. New York. The right path. Let us roll, America. Let us not look back. Let us seize the fellow by the absent coattail. Let us reveal the traipsing emperor nude. And let us remember and defend the rights of our virus dead. But let us do so with respect, with love. Why? Because Jesus says so. Why? Because we are not jackals and hyenas. Why? Because we have to get back on the road to the promised land. The return. You remember Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and then when she passed, Sara had a pencil, a legal pencil, and she took it up to the steps of the Supreme Court and laid it as an offering. The return. The pencil is magic, leaving it an offering on steps of the court. Then the call from the DA's office for a second interview. There is a hand beyond, outside, inside, at all times circulating, sweeping up worshippers who have given the Spirit his and her due, who have understood that one knows the world through heart and head, eyes, breath, and with none of these but learned faith, trusting the call out of the blue, ready to rise, pick up the phone and recite the right words, healing words, words that will bring children bawling and smiling into the world, that will give the wrong the chance to escape the unjust, that will break down the trickery of the desperate purveyors of privilege. This is the New Deal again, the throwing out of Coolidge. Mr. Smith goes to Washington. Miss Smith goes to Washington, returning now to Pomanock to assure that Walt Whitman's words will be spoken at this time that Jack Hirschman calls the American Revolution, to which I add humbly, and in the eyes of God, the revolving, rolling, raising goose hairs and kissing them without the knife, this vegetarian, wine-free yet wine-respectful, non-American, worldwide electric spinning dial, whirling, whirling from Pomanock to Washington to Frisco Bay, light as a feather rolling on wind streams into my heart and yours. I too am walking now and about to run. Do you see me, light and hope-filled, grateful that the word is in good hands and coming back to the island from where it walked abroad, coming back strong. The island, of course, Pomanock, Long Island. Georgia is still on my mind. This poem is called Georgia on my mind forever. We have an election in Georgia. December 3rd, I think, is the runoff. Jimmy Carter is walking proud today in the fields of plains, Stacey Abrams is working the phones in Atlanta. Librarians in charge of all public and private book collections are dusting off studies that examine FDR's triumph in the state, Jimmy Carter's presidential victory, and Bill Clinton knew young Paul how he squeezed by in 1992. Now in 2020, Joe Biden is bringing back the bacon and the greens and the dream, breaking down that bloody wall between red and blue, one country, one dream. Georgia, you are making us feel a shiver in our spine, a song bursting forth from our lungs. Ray Charles in the state capitol in 1979 at the piano, an old song for the New South, Georgia on my mind. And we should sing that. And I don't know how much time I have. Do I have time for one or two? Uno. And I will finish with, thank you. I will finish with this little poem called Torch. 3 stanzas, 3 lines each. The flame may seem fragile, small, almost nothing at all. But as you carry it from room to room in the dark, the bobbing, flickering wick lights up mind and heart and gives hope. And the sun is waiting around the corner of morning to come on stage to rise. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Indran. I got a tickle in my throat and had to run from the room. That was in no way a reflection of my appreciation for your great work. I loved it. I'm not from the New Yorker, but I do have a subscription. So I'd like to welcome the readers to come up and take a seat. But tonight, since this is the last event of the series for the year, we thought we'd do something a little bit different from the usual Q&A. So please come on up and get ready for the surprise.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Indra.
Indran can blow that. He's a young man. He can do it.
You got the poem too on tape.
Yeah, and look what it says.
Love and poetry.
Oh,
We got to take a picture of that before we eat that,
Right.
because that is a
And
phrase that we have
we'll show it
specialized in, love and poetry. Wonderful. And one with you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Oh,
much.
did anybody take a picture of it while it was blazing?
Did you get it in front of the?
Yeah, see it says love and poetry.
That's what we sign all our messages to, to the world.
Oh,
So do you want to take that in the back and we can welcome everybody to come
Yeah.
back and take a quick little slice, yeah?
yeah, and then we'll, if people have questions, please,
With their
You know.
mouths full of
Yeah, with
cake and icing. I think that's
Q&A
probably the best
cake.
way.
yeah, that's it, yeah, Q&A cake.
Okay.
So I'll bring
Unless
it
someone has a
back
burning question, needs to ask it now, please. Otherwise we'll get up.
Does anyone from the audience have a question they'd like to ask these wonderful writers or an observation? Please.
Hello everyone. So I'm John Emmanuel Jacquet, and I'm poet too. Thank you, Indran, to invite me tonight, and thank you for everyone, poets and novelists. Beautiful writing. So thank you, and I'm sorry for my English. So I would like to ask to Indran because when I'm listening to his poem, it's like a song. What is when you're writing poem? do you say the text in writing to find the sound, or what is your work? Tell me about this.
That's very right. That's exactly the right question. Yeah, I mean, yes. For me, poetry is a kind of word music, right? It's a sort of music, verbal music, or linguistic music, or something. So I do say the poem out loud. I used to say the poem out loud and then write it down. But now I write the poem down, but then as I'm writing it, there's a sort of internal voice that's speaking, you know? I don't necessarily utter it out loud when I'm writing, but it's an amazing experience to say the poem out loud, you know, to have this sharing here. You feel the poem in a very different way than in the silence of your desk. So, and for me, it's an oral art. It's fundamentally through the ear, but the ear, you somehow try to capture what the ear hears in words on the page, you know. So it's a union of ear and eye and hand and mind. And if you can get that union right, it's the most fitting union we can have as a world, as a country. You know? So the politics comes into it as well. You know? Yeah. So don't shut out the music of the other person. You know, listen to each other, right? And thank you.
Thank you for that question. That's actually very similar to something I was going to ask if we were going to do a traditional Q&A, but while Deedle's making slices, maybe I'll just follow up on that and ask the other writers here about the relationship between the sound and the narrative. It seemed like you were all engaged in narrative. And Robin, if you could talk about how the musicality of the prose affects your writing, your hearing of the sentences. So maybe Yuyu.
Well, for me, it's just very simple. I actually started out as a poet, and I just definitely, I always read. My father was a poet too, and I read my work out loud after I write it because I'm very conscious of the language and musicality of the prose, even if it's not poetry. So I try to be aware of that. But I'd love to hear from the poets.
Yeah. In Himalayas, in India or Nepal, you know, I'm a priest. My caste, you know, you have caste system. So I grew up with the recitals. So I will go, these holy people, my father will take me and I'll recite mantras, you know, and I'll do the prayers. So it was part of the whole thing. So I became a poet even before I knew I'm a poet, because I had to memorize all these scriptures. So, and these holy men looked at me and said, oh, wow. That's why he said, send him to school. You know, that's why he didn't want me to be his disciple. He said, send him to school because he has a good memory. So I would recite these scriptures and read to them. Like I was 4 or 5 or 6 years old. So, and they were very impressed. So also, we are in India or Nepal, we grow up, as a priest, as a Brahmin, you grow up, you wake up and you start reciting mantras. And there's a month-long, a week-long or month-long kind of events and festivals when you recite to each other, the whole family, the stories. So it's a kind of, basically the oral tradition is very strong. And also Himalayas, because so very musical. If you see two Nepalese people talking, they look like they're singing, you know. It's with the whole landscape, like the rivers flowing and the wind in the Himalayas. So it's like so much music. Onomatopoeia in I had a friend, one came from India, and we were sitting in a restaurant, this local restaurant, and on radio there was this music going on. And he said, wow, I love Himalayan music, so beautiful. I said, you know what it is? He said, what? I said, it's about telling the people, ordinary people, villagers, that if your child has diarrhea, give him salt water and and which sounded to him like a great music. They were just telling that if your child is sick, give him salt water and sugar and mix it and give him. So that it was like said so musically. That so everything in Himalayas you do is very musical, and also a lot of the meter, the folk meter, like Jhauri. One of the best known Nepali books is in Munna Madan. It's in the Jhauri edition. And also because of Sanskrit and from oral, Mahabharata, Ramayana, Vedas, so we have inherited this oral tradition of writing. So and also the initiation, the shamans, like shaman is like a poet. He dramatizes the fear of the patient, saying like he will go to the patient and say, what do you want? Get out of him. I can't give you rooster. You want goat? No, I won't give you goat. I mean, he's trying to, and the patient saying, my God, he's talking to the spirit in me, the bad spirit. So then he does all the elaborate ritual and sacrifices the rooster in front of him, and the patient says, oh my God, I'm okay. It's a whole drama of fear that he dramatizes, and through oral traditions, the drumming, and so it's so innately poetry has to do with the shamanism, with the recital, with poetry. So it's poetry is like part, and everybody is a poet in Nepal.
Yeah.
You go, everybody, like Ireland. You can porter, dishwasher, rickshaw puller, anybody, even a professor. King was a poet. The dictators are poets also. Even prime minister is a poet. Everybody is a poet. So it's kind of very living tradition in Nepal, in India.
Okay, thank you. And Sara?
So,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Was there a question?
I have a question.
We're gonna hear from
Please.
Sara. I'll answer shortly so you can speak. Similarly to spirituality, I grew up in the Catholic tradition, and the hymns and the chanting is evidence in church. And so my first book, I was really interested in that beat and how beat poets like Ginsberg, who I really liked, and Whitman use lyricism to create beat. And the beated structure of that book is intended to create specific meditative beats. But then in this newest book, who we've argued, I've argued with my colleagues about its musicality at the beginning. And I know Indran didn't like it, which is why I was pointing to him. But now
No,
does.
I liked it, but well, that's a lot of good. Go ahead.
Well, so the purpose of the voice poems and the theatrics that I tried to convey is to capture phonetics and a specific style of speaking that's inherent in the storytelling itself. And so the written version of it is really important to see too. And I kind of abandoned the musical search, that song type incantation that I really like with poetry. That makes poems easy to write, I think, because for me, as you just mentioned, it's like speaking, and I feel very comfortable with the song like speaking. But in this new book, I wanted to capture a different kind of song that wasn't my own, so I intentionally created like music theory, challenged myself to write on a staff some complicated piece of music, and that's how I hope it's written.
It comes across. I think maybe we should continue in the back with cake. Okay, so can you hold on to your question and then maybe just present it in the back area? Why don't we go join Deedle and have some birthday cake and celebrate? Thank you. Thank you guys so much. Such a wonderful evening.